For 3,000 years, the Kithra had been a nightmare that kept entire civilizations awake at night. These weren't your typical alien conquerors from the movies. Picture something that looks like a 9-foot-tall armored insect, but with the intelligence of a chess grandmaster and the killing instinct of a great white shark. Their bodies were covered in thick, chitinous plates that could deflect laser fire, and they had 4 arms that ended in claws sharp enough to slice through steel like butter. But here's the thing that made them truly terrifying. They didn't just look scary. They had earned their reputation the hard way. The Kithra came from a world called Vexhi, and if you think Earth is rough, you haven't seen anything yet. Imagine a planet where the gravity is so strong that it would crush a normal person instantly. The air is filled with toxic methane storms that can strip the flesh from bones, and the native wildlife makes Earth's most dangerous predators look like house cats. On Vexhi, even the plants try to kill you. The Kithra didn't become apex predators by accident. They had to fight for every breath, every meal, every moment of survival since the day they were born. Their young were thrown into combat scenarios that would break seasoned warriors from other species. Those who survived became stronger. Those who didn't, well, they became food for the next generation. The galaxy had learned to fear the distinctive sound of Kithra warships dropping out of hyperspace. It was a low, grinding noise that seemed to vibrate through your bones and settle in your stomach like ice water. When the Kithra showed up at your world, you had 2 choices: submit completely or prepare to die fighting. There was never a third option. They had conquered or destroyed over 200 worlds, and each victory had only made them more confident in their superiority. The Kithra believed they were evolution's perfect answer to survival, the ultimate killing machine wrapped in living armor and driven by an intelligence that could outthink any enemy. They looked down on other species as weak, soft creatures who had somehow managed to develop technology despite their obvious genetic inferiority. Their society was built around strength and dominance. Kithra children learned to hunt before they learned to speak. They were taught that mercy was a fatal flaw, that compassion would get you killed, and that the only way to truly live was to be the predator rather than the prey. Their greatest heroes were those who had killed the most enemies, conquered the most worlds, and survived the longest in their brutal hierarchy. So when the Galactic Council's deep space monitoring stations picked up strange signals from an uncharted system, nobody was surprised when they decided to send the Kithra to investigate. It was standard procedure. Really, find a new species, send in the ultimate warriors to determine if they pose any threat, and either recruit them or eliminate them based on the results. The war fleet that assembled for this mission was called the Bone Render, and it was commanded by some of the most decorated Kithra warriors in the galaxy. These weren't fresh recruits looking to prove themselves. These were battle-hardened veterans who had seen it all and killed it all. They loaded their ships with enough firepower to glass an entire planet, if necessary, and they fully expected to use it. As their massive vessels translated into the system that contained this mysterious world called Earth, the Kithra crew was already discussing how they would divide up the conquest rights. Some wanted to strip mine the planet for resources, others thought it might make a good hunting preserve, and a few suggested using it as a training ground for their young warriors. Commander Thakmor stood on the bridge of his flagship, studying the blue and green world that hung in the darkness ahead of them. His 4 eyes, each capable of seeing across multiple spectrums, analyzed every detail of this new planet. The atmospheric composition, the weather patterns, the electromagnetic signatures that suggested technology, everything looked promising for either exploitation or elimination. What none of them realized was that they were about to encounter something that would challenge every assumption they had ever made about strength, survival, and what it truly meant to be the apex species in a dangerous universe. The Kithra had spent thousands of years becoming the perfect predators, but they were about to meet a species that had taken a completely different path to dominance, one that would leave them questioning everything they thought they knew about power and superiority. The first Kithra landing party materialized in Central Park on a sunny Saturday afternoon, right in the middle of what humans call a perfect weekend. Families were having picnics. Kids were playing on swings, and people were walking their dogs like it was the most normal thing in the world. Commander Thakmor had chosen this location because their sensors indicated it was a major population center, perfect for making an immediate impact on a local species. The plan was simple and had worked flawlessly on 200 other worlds. appear suddenly in a crowded area, let the locals see exactly what they were dealing with, then wait for the inevitable panic, screaming, and desperate attempts at either worship or resistance. Both reactions were equally useful for establishing dominance. But as the shimmering energy field faded and revealed 5 towering Kithra warriors in full battle armor, something completely unexpected happened. Instead of running away screaming, people actually started walking toward them. Not cautiously, not with weapons drawn, but with what could only be described as curiosity. Commander Thakmore's 4 eyes blinked in confusion as a human female approached his position. She was small, maybe 5.5 feet tall, wearing what appeared to be casual recreational clothing, and carrying some kind of frozen treat. This had to be some sort of mistake. Where were the guards? Where were the weapons? Where was the fear that should have been radiating from every pore of this obviously inferior creature? The woman stopped about 3 feet away and held out the frozen treat toward him. Through their universal translators, her words came through clearly. "Hi there. You look like you might be hot in all that armor. Would you like some ice cream? It's vanilla with chocolate chips." For a moment, Commander Thakmore was too stunned to react. In 3,000 years of Kithra history, no species had ever offered them food upon first contact. They had been offered tribute, sacrifices, surrender terms, and desperate bribes, but never ice cream. His combat training kicked in automatically, and he swiped at the woman with his primary combat claw. Not a kill, just to establish the proper fear response that should have been there from the beginning. The woman simply stepped to one side, letting his claw pass harmlessly through the air where she had been standing. Then she looked up at him with concern and asked, "Oh, are you okay? Did you trip or something? Do you need help?" This was not going according to any scenario the Kithra had ever trained for. Commander Thakmore looked around at his warriors and saw the same confusion in their postures. These humans should be fleeing in terror or attacking in desperation. Instead, more of them were gathering, and they seemed to be trying to figure out if the Kithra needed assistance. Then something happened that would be burned into Kithra memory for generations to come. A small human child, maybe 6 years old, was running across the grass when he tripped and fell. The child scraped his knee on the concrete path and started crying, a thin trickle of red blood visible on his skin. Every Kithra warrior present immediately tensed for what should happen next. On any civilized world, an injured individual, especially a young one, would either be quickly eliminated to prevent weakness from spreading or would be abandoned to fend for themselves. It was basic evolutionary logic. The wounded slowed down the group and attract predators. But these humans did something that defied all natural law. Instead of abandoning the injured child, adults immediately surrounded him, not to finish him off, not to drive him away, but to help. A woman who appeared to be the child's mother knelt down and gently cleaned the wound while speaking in soothing tones. Another adult produced some kind of medical supplies from a small bag. A third human offered the crying child a colorful toy to distract him from the pain. Commander Thakmore watched in complete bewilderment as these soft, seemingly defenseless creatures demonstrated something that no Kithra had ever witnessed. The strong protecting the weak not because they had to, but because they wanted to. The child was clearly the most vulnerable member of the group, yet instead of seeing him as a liability, they saw him as someone worth protecting and caring for. Even more confusing was what happened next. Other humans in the area noticed the Kithra watching and started explaining what was happening. A man named Pete walked over and said, "Don't worry about little Jake there. Kids fall down all the time when they're learning to run. His mom, Nancy, will have him fixed up in no time. Kids are pretty tough. Actually, they bounce back from stuff that would keep us adults complaining for weeks." The Kithra stood there in their battle armor, weapons ready, prepared for conquest or annihilation, and instead found themselves receiving a casual lecture about human child-rearing practices from a species that should have been cowering in terror. Over the next few days, the Kithra science teams began their standard planetary analysis, expecting to find yet another soft world that had somehow managed to produce intelligent life despite its obvious lack of proper survival pressure. What they discovered instead left even their most experienced xenobiologists speechless with shock. Earth wasn't just a death world. It was arguably more hostile than their own legendary homeworld of HFY. The initial atmospheric readings alone should have been impossible. The planet's air contained 21% oxygen, a gas so reactive and corrosive that it should have prevented any complex life from developing. On most worlds, oxygen was considered a toxic waste product that had to be carefully contained. But that was just the beginning. As their scanners dug deeper into Earth's environmental data, the picture became increasingly disturbing. This world was subject to weather patterns that would have wiped out Kithra civilization in a matter of years. Massive rotating storm systems called hurricanes regularly formed over the oceans, packing winds that could level entire cities. These storms would then march across populated areas with the destructive power of orbital bombardments. And the humans just lived with them. They had developed something called a hurricane season, where they would track these monsters, prepare their settlements, and then simply ride them out like they were minor inconveniences. Some humans even sought out these storms on purpose, flying aircraft directly into their centers to study them. The Kithra couldn't believe what they were seeing. The geological surveys were even more shocking. Earth's crust was broken into massive plates that constantly shifted and ground against each other, causing catastrophic earthquakes that could swallow entire cities in seconds. Volcanic eruptions regularly spewed toxic gases and molten rock across vast areas, creating conditions that would have required full environmental suits on any civilized world. Yet humans had built their settlements right on top of these geological time bombs. Cities like San Francisco sat directly on major fault lines, while places like Naples were constructed in the shadow of active volcanoes. When asked about the seemingly suicidal behavior, the humans just shrugged and talked about acceptable risk and building codes, as if living on a planet that was actively trying to kill them was the most natural thing in the universe. The biological diversity readings were perhaps the most terrifying of all. Earth teemed with life forms specifically designed to kill other life forms. Microscopic organisms that could dissolve tissue, parasites that could hijack nervous systems, predators with toxins powerful enough to drop creatures hundreds of times their size. The oceans alone contained nightmare fuel that made Kithra horror stories look like children's bedtime tales. Great white sharks that could sense a single drop of blood from miles away. Octopi that could change color and shape to become perfect ambush predators. Box jellyfish whose stings could kill in minutes. And in the deepest part of the ocean, creatures so alien and terrifying that they looked like they belonged on some demon world rather than a planet that supported civilization. On land, the diversity of deadly creatures was equally staggering. Venomous snakes, spiders, and insects. Large predators like lions, tigers, and bears that could tear apart anything smaller than themselves. Even the plant got into the killing game, with some species producing toxins so powerful that simply touching them could cause agonizing death. But here's what really broke the Kithra minds. Humans had not only survived all of this, they had conquered it. Every single continent, every climate zone, from the frozen Antarctic to the scorching Sahara Desert, humans had found a way to not just survive, but thrive. They had spread across their Deathworld like no species of Kithra had ever encountered. Even more impressive was how they had dealt with their natural predators. Instead of evolving bigger claws or thicker armor, like any sensible species would have done, humans had used something the Kithra were only beginning to understand: cooperation and intelligence. They had eliminated threats not through individual combat prowess, but by working together and using tools. Bears that could tear apart a single human became manageable when humans worked in groups. Diseases that could wipe out individuals were conquered when humans shared knowledge and developed medicine. Even the planet's hostile environment was gradually being tamed through something the Kithra had never seen before: large-scale environmental engineering. Humans didn't just adapt to their world's dangers. They actively changed their environment to suit their needs. They built dams to control floods, developed agriculture to ensure food security, and created transportation networks that allowed them to move resources from safe areas to dangerous ones. They had essentially terraformed their own planet while living on it. Commander Thakmor found himself staring at the data displays, trying to process what should have been impossible. These soft, seemingly fragile creatures had conquered a death world more hostile than his own, not by becoming perfect individual killing machines, but by becoming something else entirely. Something the Kithra had never encountered in 3,000 years of galactic conquest. The breakthrough came when Dr. Michael Harrison, a xenobiologist from Cambridge University, was granted permission to board the Kithra flagship for what was supposed to be a routine scientific exchange. Unlike every other species the Kithra had encountered, Dr. Harrison didn't arrive with gifts of tribute, weapons for defense, or even basic protective gear. He showed up carrying nothing but a worn leather briefcase full of research papers and what appeared to be an endless supply of curiosity. Commander Thackmore had agreed to this meeting mostly out of confusion. In his experience, when faced with superior force, species either submitted immediately or fought to the death. They didn't send middle-aged academics who looked like they spent more time in libraries and gyms. Dr. Harrison was average height, slightly overweight, wore glasses that kept sliding down his nose, and had the kind of soft hands that had never held a weapon in anger. But from the moment Dr. Harrison stepped aboard the Kithra warship, it became clear that he was operating by completely different rules. Instead of showing proper fear or respect for the galaxy's most dangerous predators, he immediately started asking questions. Not the usual, please don't kill us questions that most species open with, but genuine scientific inquiries about Kithra biology, culture, and history. Fascinating bone density, he said, studying Commander Thackmore with the same intensity that a child might examine a new toy. I'm estimating your skeletal structure could support at least 3 times standard gravity. And those secondary arms, are they fully functional or specialized for specific tasks? The muscle attachment points suggest incredible gripping strength. Commander Thackmore found himself answering before he realized what was happening. No one had ever asked him about Kithra anatomy from a purely scientific perspective. Usually, other species were too busy being terrified to notice the elegant engineering that millions of years of evolution had created. As the days passed, Dr. Harrison became a regular fixture on the bridge. He would arrive each morning with fresh questions and stay until late in the evening, scribbling notes and sketching diagrams. Gradually, his questions began to dig deeper than just biology. He wanted to understand how Kithra society worked, why they had developed their particular approach to survival, and what their home world was really like. Commander Thackmore found himself describing Vexhai in ways he had never articulated before. The constant struggle for resources, the way Kithra young were tested from birth, the harsh reality that weakness meant death and strength meant survival. Dr. Harrison listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or asking for clarification, but never once suggesting that the Kithra way was wrong or primitive. Then Dr. Harrison began to share human stories, and that's when things got really interesting. He talked about Earth's history, but not the sanitized version that most species presented to intimidating aliens. He told the truth about humanity's violent past. The wars, the conflicts, the times when humans have been just as brutal and unforgiving as any Kithra warrior. We weren't always like we are now, Dr. Harrison explained one evening as they stood looking at Earth through the ship's viewport. For most of our history, we saw problems the same way you do, through strength and dominance. The strong took what they wanted, the weak suffered, and everyone assumed that was just how the universe worked. Commander Thackmore's mandibles clicked with interest. This was more like what he expected from a successful species. But then something changed. Dr. Harrison continued. We started to realize that our greatest strength wasn't our ability to fight each other, but our ability to work together. We discovered that when we stopped seeing other humans as competitors for limited resources and started seeing them as partners in unlimited possibilities, we could accomplish things that no individual could ever achieve alone. He told stories about human cooperation that seemed impossible to Kithra ears. Medical research where scientists from different nations shared information freely instead of hoarding it for advantage. Disaster relief efforts where humans would risk their own lives to save complete strangers. Art and music that was created not to intimidate enemies, but simply to express beauty and bring joy to others. Most shocking of all were the stories about human child-rearing. Dr. Harrison explained how humans had gradually moved away from a harsh survival training that had once been common, instead focusing on education, creativity, and emotional development. They had discovered that children who were nurtured and supported actually became stronger adults than those who were forced to fight for everything from birth. We learned that true strength isn't about being the last one standing, Dr. Harrison said quietly. It's about making sure that as many people as possible get to stand with you. For the first time in his life, Commander Thakmore found himself questioning the fundamental principles that had guided Kithra's civilization for thousands of years. The transformation didn't happen overnight, and it certainly wasn't easy. When Commander Thakmore returned to the Kithra fleet with his new perspectives, he was met with everything from skepticism to outright hostility. Many of his own warriors accused him of being infected with some kind of human mental virus that had made him soft and weak. Sub-Commander Vector was particularly vocal in his opposition. "These humans have poisoned your mind," he declared during a heated council meeting. "They're making you forget what we are, the apex predators of the galaxy. We don't protect the weak, we eliminate them. We don't cooperate, we dominate. That's how we survived Vex High, and that's how we'll survive the rest of the universe." But Commander Thakmore had seen something that couldn't be unseen. He had watched Dr. Harrison work late into the night, not for personal glory or advancement, but because he genuinely wanted to understand and help bridge the gap between their species. He had observed human families where the strong didn't rule through fear, but guided through love and patience. Most importantly, he had begun to understand that Earth's harsh environment hadn't created humans despite their cooperative nature. It had created them because of it. The real turning point came during what humans call a natural disaster. A massive earthquake struck the Pacific coast, while several Kithra observation teams were still on the surface. According to every piece of Kithra training and instinct, this should have been the perfect opportunity to observe how humans really behaved when their survival was threatened. Surely, when faced with genuine danger, they would abandon their facade of cooperation and revert to the brutal self-interest that governed all intelligent life. Instead, the Kithra witnessed something that shattered their understanding of how sapient beings were supposed to act during crisis. As buildings collapsed and fires broke out across the city, humans didn't flee in panic or fight each other for limited resources. They organized. Rescue teams immediately began searching through rubble for survivors. Medical personnel set up emergency treatment centers. Ordinary citizens who had never met each other before worked together to clear debris and provide shelter for those who had lost their homes. What amazed the Kithra observers most was that humans actively sought out the most vulnerable members of their society to help first. Instead of saving the strong and abandoning the weak, they prioritized rescuing children, elderly individuals, and anyone who couldn't help themselves. It was a complete opposite of everything the Kithra thought they knew about survival behavior. Commander Thakmore found himself working alongside a human rescue team led by a woman named Kate Wilson, the same person who had offered him ice cream during their first encounter. Watching her coordinate the rescue efforts, he realized that her soft appearance had been completely deceiving. She displayed tactical thinking that would have impressed any Kithra War leader, organizational skills that rivaled their best logistics commanders, and a determination that never wavered even when the situation seemed hopeless. But what really got to him was watching Kate make the decision to risk her own life to save a trapped child. There was no evolutionary advantage to her actions. The child was related to her, couldn't provide any resources or benefits, and saving him meant putting herself in genuine danger. Yet she crawled into a partially collapsed building without hesitation because, as she explained to confused Kithra, that's what you do. You help people. As the weeks passed, more Kithra warriors began participating in human activities. They worked with construction crews rebuilding damaged areas and discovered that their incredible physical strength could be used to create rather than destroy. They assisted human scientists with research projects and found that their tactical thinking skills were incredibly valuable for solving complex problems. Most surprisingly, they began working with human teachers and discovered that educating young minds was far more challenging and rewarding than they had ever imagined. The change wasn't universal. Plenty of Kithra rejected these new ideas completely, but enough were transformed by the experience that a new faction began to emerge within their society. They called themselves the Builders rather than the traditional Destroyers, and they began to advocate for a fundamental shift in how the Kithra interacted with the galaxy. Commander Thakmore, now calling himself Protector Thakmore in honor of his new understanding of strength, established the first joint Kithra-human settlement on a previously uninhabitable world called New Haven. The planet had everything that should have made colonization impossible: extreme weather, hostile wildlife, and geological instability, that would have defeated any previous settlement attempt. But working together, humans and Kithra proved that cooperation really was stronger than individual might. The Kithra provided the physical resilience to survive the harsh conditions, while humans like engineer Lisa Cooper and medic James Bennett brought the creative problem-solving and collaborative spirit needed to turn survival into genuine prosperity. Within just 2 years, New Haven had grown from a desperate outpost to a thriving community that attracted settlers from dozens of species across the galaxy. It became living proof that the galaxy's most feared predators could choose to become its greatest protectors, and that true strength came not from standing alone at the top, but from lifting others up to stand beside you,